Welcome to the Berean Brotherhood.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the Berean Brotherhood. We are your host, and this is episode number 38. And today we'll be talking about global censorship, new laws being passed around the world in different countries, and believers' involvement with politics. And we want to give you biblical examples of men and women who engaged in civic affairs. That's it.
Welcome back, boys and girls, men and women of all ages and professions and nationalities. We wanted to talk about mostly the UK riots that were happening in the last couple of weeks and months, and the United Kingdom, the British response in government to censorship of specific social media postings. And it's before we even get into that, we just want to give you a 3-second kind of model or framework for how we think about politics. We've spelled out before, we will not be endorsing a single party or candidate. That does not mean that we don't have our political preferences. And obviously there are people we think should be in office, but we're not here to endorse any one specific political party or human group. We're all about pointing people towards the Bible and towards God, because we believe that that's the best way to get people to make good moral decisions, godly decisions about who should have power and who shouldn't. However, a little disclaimer there, a little fine print. We also wanted to clarify that we think it's extremely important that Christians are involved in politics. So
Yes.
we look back on a couple episodes. We're always trying to adjust and fix up. And one of the things we did not want to kind of give out was the belief that we thought that Christians should just be isolationists and just stick to the church and close the door to the church and let the world kind of blow up. I believe personally that Christians should be involved in politics. It's extremely important that Christians have a say in the matter, because politics, they say politics is downstream from culture, and I believe that culture is downstream from religion and belief and philosophical kind of foundational beliefs. So if you're talking about the levers of human power, we're here to make the biblical case that Christians and God-fearing people have always been involved in politics. However, the difference is that they've balanced that approach to human affairs by always keeping the ministry and focus on God and biblical truth front and center. So we don't think any one human politician is going to save us all from the end of the world or is going to reap some type of utopia. We don't believe that human politics are capable of that, that most of human politics is attempting to address human issues that cannot be solved outside of a godly worldview. But we're trying to balance that with the idea that Christians should be involved in casting their votes and in getting involved in the process in a way that benefits the church and the people outside the church.
I agree with you, Lee, 100%. I think that when it comes to politics, there's a lot of people that feel like these decisions have already been made, right? And that your vote doesn't really matter. And these are this propaganda that is being spread out there. And maybe there's some truth to it. Maybe there isn't, but it doesn't mean that we should not get involved, right? And for the Christian, it could be a little tricky because what happens is that there are sides that already tell you what they believe. So if you happen to agree with something on that one side, it automatically you have to accept everything else that that side represents. And something that a book that I read recently that really helped me to decipher or distinguish how could I be involved with civic engagement yet not be entangled with a specific political party, is a book called Compassion and Conviction by Justin Giboney, right? And basically, he poses that we can define for ourselves our stance without letting a particular party define that stance for us. And we can answer political questions and frame it so that it's not impossible for faithful Christians to be divided against each other and against other people, where we're not stuck in binary debates, whether you're red or blue or Democratic or Republican, that the way that it's usually framed, right? So we can share our biblical values, and also be faithful to social justice.
Right. And just three quick examples of that before we get into the actual United Kingdom censorship and riots issue and all that. Just three spark notes, quick answers. John the Baptist, for example, in the Gospels, was very involved in the political scene at the time. He was so involved in the political scene that he told the ruler of that locality, Herod, that he was basically in an affair with his brother's wife. And he told him to his face. He told him that in a public setting. He was basically saying that the political people in power were abusing their power, doing evil, ungodly things. And John the Baptist later on lost his head because of it. So very involved in politics. The Bible does not say that John the Baptist campaign was walking around with no Herod for 2024 signs. It
Right.
doesn't get that deep into John the Baptist kind of like obsession with this specific candidate,
Right, right.
but he definitely saw involvement in politics as a part of the ministry that he was preaching to people about God's kingdom. It
Hmm.
just wasn't, I think, the mistake a lot of Christians make today, where they see politics as the center gravitational well, the focal point of everything they do. And they probably don't have enough trust in the Lord that things are going to work out the way the Lord wants them to work out. But John the Baptist definitely got involved. We also have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel's three famous buddies, who I love personally because they balance the line between working for what would be considered an evil, secular, authoritarian ruler in the book of
Hmm.
Daniel. They were administrators in his kingdom. They were literally the office guys. They were high level leaders within the kingdom. They didn't just leave because the government was doing evil things. They were within the kingdom attempting to do good from their professional roles in the political environment. But when push came to shove, the famous words from them to King Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel, they said, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. When Nebuchadnezzar said, worship this big idol made in my glory and my image. They
Hmm.
said, look, buddy. You may be the king and you may be our boss. We don't got to defend ourselves to you. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he doesn't, just know, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. And Nebuchadnezzar got super angry after that, and everyone knows he threw them in the furnace and they didn't burn. But they were administrators in what would biblically be considered an evil political environment. They didn't abandon the environment completely. They didn't go into exile and say, we can never, ever work in office. They attempted to influence it towards a godly way. But when a line was drawn in the sand, they made their stand. They said, it doesn't matter if God does a miracle or not. We're not here to serve you. We're here to serve the Lord through your kingdom. And if you don't want us to do that, we're not bowing before your image. And then, of course, probably one of the most famous ones of all is in the book of Revelation. It talks about the mark of the beast and the Antichrist coming onto earth and ruling through political authority. And it says that people will not be allowed to trade or to buy goods and services without the identifying mark of this antichrist like government on their hands, which means that there are going to be people who are going to reject this political move, this authoritarian move, this satanic move, to have them identify with the antichrist government, and they will not receive the marks on their hands, which I mean, that's a pretty Christian thing to do or biblical thing, but that's a very, very political thing to do as well. You are not accepting the slogan, you're not accepting the moniker that this authoritarian government institution is placing on you, because you're seeing government the way that godly people have seen it all throughout time. So yeah, it's kind of like, we'll wrap up this little section, this ramble with this, but in the Declaration of Independence, they see freedom and liberty as something that comes from the belief that all men are created equally in the eyes of God. All of those enjoyable democratic values are not seen as, they're not axiomatic, they're not foundational in a cosmic way. The foundation is a belief in God that then leads people to believing in things like liberty and freedom. So even in the founding documents of the United States, it's foundational, it's axiomatic that belief in God is or going to be political in some sense. The way humans manage each other through political mechanisms and governments is going to be influenced by whether or not you believe that God has instilled these properties in humans to manage in a responsible way through government.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lee. And I want to share a verse with everyone. Psalm chapter 37, verses 7 through 9. It says, rest in the Lord and wait for him patiently. Do not
Mm.
get upset because of those who are successful in their ways, because of the person who carries out wicked schemes, right? Cease from anger and abandon wrath. Do not get upset. It leads only to what? Evil doing. So evildoers will be eliminated, and those who wait upon the Lord will inherit the land. That's what the text tells us. And like the three gentlemen that you mentioned, I think when it comes to John the Baptist, as Christians, we need to have a boldness to speak truth to power, no matter the fact that it may cost our life, no matter the fact that we may be persecuted for it. If we stand on truth and godly principles, I think at the end of the day, God is the one that's going to be honored, and it doesn't matter specifically what's going to happen to us. One day, the freedoms that we very much hold today and are protected may no longer be there. And what are we going to do? Are we going to cower in our homes? Are we going to be running from the government? Or are we going to stand firm and speak truth to power and not be afraid of the consequences, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did towards King Nebuchadnezzar? And one thing I love about the book of Daniel is that in the book of Daniel, it's God's redemptive plan being revealed, that God doesn't only have a plan with Israel, but he's actually has a plan with the entire world, right?
Right.
So King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and all of a sudden he's shown multiple empires, and it's God's way of showing not only the lead empire at that moment, but it's also showing Daniel that he's going to be ministering to multiple kingdoms, multiple empires, and that God is the one who's orchestrating even the things that are happening in Israel, but also how he's going to reveal himself through Israel to the entire world, and how that was going to happen uh, through their oppression and through their exile, right? And if you look at people like Daniel, you look at people like Joseph, both of them were heavily involved in the political atmosphere. They were raised to second and third in command of the kingdom, of the empire. And it just goes to show that because they held the positions that they held, they were able to influence with a godly um, principles, godly precepts within the entire Gentile nation that was the ruling power of the world at that moment. So it just goes to show that if we're faithfully committed, faithfully allowing ourselves to define what we believe and not let others define it for us, I think that we can vote properly. I think that we can stand firm on our convictions, and yet lead with love and compassion.
Right, right. It's like politics is seen from a biblical perspective. And we're going to go into the UK thing right now, but just it's not politics is the solution to human matters. God is the solution to human matters, and political power is given to his people in that goal. So one of the things that Daniel and all these guys, John the Baptist, didn't do was think that the entire ministry they had, talking about God and humanity's purpose and turning away from sin, was rooted in a political victory. They had no concern about the outcome of the political action they were taking. They were simply there to do what they were biblically commanded to do, and political authority and success came as a result of that. But in the United Kingdom right now, basically, if you haven't been following the news, there's been a bunch of riots left and right all over the UK. A lot of it has been tied to some underlying social issues that have been budding up in the last couple of years, especially after COVID. But the
Right.
most recent slate of riots is tied to some information and misinformation that was spread online about a stabbing that occurred in the UK where a couple of children, I believe, lost their lives and were injured. And some social media posts were supposedly credited for saying that it was a Muslim asylum seeker that was responsible for killing these children. From my research, I've seen it was not a Muslim asylum seeker. This person was born in Wales. They were not from outside the country. But just all of the political turmoil around immigration crises hitting Western democracies, asylum seekers, border control, all of this stuff, I think, has kind of foamed up in this soup of human issues. And now the line between what is true and what is not true and people's reactions to that has kind of hit an explosive point. But The scary part to me is not the riots, because that's happened all throughout history, but what the Bible has to say about how governments will use any type of social upheaval, whether it's justified or not, and they'll use that in an effort to leverage authority and political power against the citizenry. So in the UK, for example, the UK government has been famous for saying in the last month or two quotes like, think before you post, arresting up to 9 people a day since
Wow.
2017 for allegedly offensive messages. Again, offensive being a subjective term. What's offensive for one person may not be offensive for the next person. So the government serving as kind of the arbitrator of what is or is not offensive or violent, and actually throwing people in jail or fining them because they violate these kind of precepts that they install. It's not isolated just the United Kingdom. In Canada, you've had Bill C-10 through C-16, which were kind of unprecedented for the amount of regulatory authority they've given to the government. That if someone, content creator or some platform, posts something that's unseemly or offensive or bigoted, of course, all those terms are determined by the government. They get to determine what is or isn't bigoted.
Right, exactly.
It's not the church determining it. It's not a popular vote or consensus determining it. It's limited political figures in government determining it. Then they can fine you and even throw you in jail for these things. And none of this is alien if you come from a biblical worldview. If you don't come up from a biblical worldview, you might think, I thought authoritarianism and tyrants and dictatorships, I thought that was a 1950s thing. I thought that was a Hitler thing. I thought that was a feudal Japan thing. I thought these were isolated moments in history. But remember, the Bible's not interested in painting any pretty pictures. It's there to tell you the truth about the world you live in. And one of the truths the Bible comes to is that men and women in power, unchecked and outside of a godly worldview, outside of a fear of the Lord, will always gravitate towards authoritarianism. It's it's tried and true. It's the bread and butter of humanity. It's funny because I'll end the ramble with this, but I remember really seeing it during the COVID times, because on both sides. I remember as a Christian listening to friends who said, well, if you don't wear a mask, then what you're doing is you're killing innocent people because you're spreading this disease around.
Hmm.
And I think if you're not willing to wear a mask, then you should lose your job and you should be thrown in jail for that, because what you're doing is violence against other people. And I thought that was crazy. I was like, man, you're willing to throw away the job of other people. As a Christian, you're willing to do this. You're willing to take away income from them, take the food out of their kids' mouths because you disagree about the best way to deal with this outbreak. But I also remember on the conservative side, some people saying, well, if you do wear a mask, then you're nothing but a drone. You're nothing but a government stooge. You'll do anything the government tells you to do. You'll hurt innocent people no matter what. So I think if you do wear a mask, you should be thrown in jail and you should lose your job for that, because it just shows that you're nothing more than a tyrannical kind of person. And I would listen to them and think, man, you guys are the exact same thing. This is not at all how the Bible prescribes we should deal with people who disagree with us. This is not how the Bible says Christians or believers in power should deal with it. Oh, you don't agree with me? You get thrown into the jail. You get thrown into the gulag. That's not at all a Christian prescription for it. But yeah, it was just kind of shocking because it reminded me that tyranny is not some relic of the history book you saw in high school, but tyranny and control and evil are at the heart of every single human being, ourselves included. And God is the only solution to kind of overstepping that natural inclination we have to control whatever we can with whatever power we have.
Yeah, so the European Commission officially made a law-making branch of the European Union, and it's called the High Level Experts. And together, they came together to advise a political initiative to counter fake news and
Mhm.
disinformation that's spread online. This group is called H-Leg, which means they're the high level expert group, right? They
Ah,
include
yes, the experts.
they include members with backgrounds in academia, journalism, broadcasting, and professional fact checking, right? So they publish their report, and they are the ones who are observing what is called or termed fake news, right? So they're the ones that are defining fake news in Europe, right? But we
Mhm.
also see censorship happening in multiple countries. Like in Malaysia, there's a ruling to punish fake news or what they deem to be fake news with up to 6 years in prison. There's multiple nations like Indonesia, Thailand, and Cambodia who are also passing laws that are going to go against what they are identifying as fake news. So that is the stamp that they're putting over whatever they want to censor, right? And when it
Right.
comes to that situation in UK, right, there has been an uprise in Muslims, Muslim refugees coming into the UK, and they have their public prayer. They also have the belief within Islam that they want it to be Islam to rule the world, right? So the UK is trying to also battle this, what they believe is an invasion to the UK government, right? There have been bombings. I'm not saying that all Muslims are terrorists or that Muslims come with this extremism, right? Not all Muslims practice extremism, but the UK has deemed it to be a problem, and therefore any kind of misinformation to lead to behind the scenes, the agenda is to kind of gather the people up to riot against the Muslims, right? And
Right.
against suppressing their freedom of speech. And the thing about freedom of speech is that it has its place with every single religion and every single person, right?
100%.
So, as a Christian, I cannot say that my freedom of speech is of more value than someone who is a Muslim,
Right.
right? And if there's any way of them suppressing a Muslim's freedom of speech, at some point it's going to get back to the Christian. So, we have to be very careful on what we're saying about who should be censored and who shouldn't be censored, right? Because at
Right.
some point, it's going to trickle down and it's going to affect every single believer, every single person, no matter what religion, no matter what, if they deem it to be hate speech or they deem it to be false news or fake news, and they'll control it and they'll censor it. And it looks like they're even trying to censor things online. So you can't even have your opinion on your own social media platforms, right? So in France, there's a Frenchman who is the owner of a company called Telegram. His name is Mr. Durov, and he was arrested in France on charges related to speaking and having illicit material or basically speaking against government. So they basically arrested him, and his um, program or his website, his app is basically an ulterior news media outlet that is for the free people, for those who don't want to hear what the government is trying to uh, and the propaganda that they're trying to push. They're actually allowing for different outlets to be able to speak freely, and he was just arrested. So we see that these things are happening in Canada. Same thing. There's so many things happening in Canada as far as them trying to censor what they call hate speech and passing regulations on social media platforms. All of these things, I feel like it's happening globally slowly.
Right.
But as you mentioned, Revelation 13, Mark of the Beast, the world system that is going to come eventually is going to be a system where you are not going to be, these freedoms are going to change. These
Hmm.
freedoms that we hold dear to in America will change at some point. This new world order or universal system that is going to be in place, uh, um, that is going to be put into place is going to determine maybe through a point system or maybe through a system of universal income, right? That it's gonna affect how much money you're gonna get or not. It's gonna be like a social credit, right? A social credit system where you get plus credits or minus credits for your behavior, and all of these things are ways to modify or control. And what are you going to do as a Christian? Are you going to sit back, or are you going to be struck with fear? Are you going to sit back struck with fear, or are you going to stand firm, hold on the word of God, and not let these things put fear in you? because we know that we're not supposed to operate under a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. So let's make sound decisions, wise decisions, and I'll end with that.
Yeah, and to back up what David's saying, someone may listen to this and think, well, you guys have been watching a little too much Outer Limits, or you've been watching a little too much Black Mirror. You're getting a little wild with the conspiracy theories.
I haven't even
Social
seen
credit.
Black Mirror at all, but
Well, Black Mirror had one episode where there was a social credit system where basically how much you smiled in a cab and what kind of posts you put on
mm,
Facebook and your bank account would all lead to this social standing. And depending
mm.
on that standing, you would get new jobs or you get removed from your house and et cetera, et cetera. But check out China in 2024.
Right.
China
I was just
has
about to say that.
they have a basic social currency system. It's
Right.
based on your credit score, it's based on your income, it's based on your reported reputation with party loyalists, with people who are loyal to the Chinese official party on the Xinjiang Po or whatever his name is, Winnie the Pooh. It's a social point system that dictates where your hierarchy can be in that social setting based on a
Hmm.
number of factors determined by the state. So it's just crazy because we never thought this type of on a secular point of view, we never thought this type of tyranny and control could affect Western democracy, right? Because we are like, Western democracy is free, it's kind of immune from it. But again, democracy is composed of its smaller parts. The way I see it is, like the old saying goes, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. Newsflash, if you play a lot of video games and you die a lot, the solution to finding out how not to die is to find out what's going wrong when you die the first time.
Right.
Because that first death usually leads to the enemy getting more items, they get a heavier strategic advantage, they get numbers, and they snowball that into a bigger win. That's just competitive strategy 101. And if you're looking at the world and you're saying, hey, the most authoritarian places on the planet, like China, are creating social currency systems, your value as a human being is completely based off what a Chinese bureaucrat determines is your value. And then you're like, well, that's on that side of the world. And that's how most of history was. But on this side of the world, democracy's safe. And you're seeing bills in Canada like C11, C16 that say if a Christian goes out to a public square and says, I believe that men and women were designed to complement each other, I believe that men and women were designed to love each other in a relationship that God has blessed humanity with as a gift. I believe that when men and women come together in that same type of relationship, the personality differences, the biological difference, the social difference, the spiritual differences lead to relationships that are catastrophic for the people involved. You can go to Canada right now, and under certain provisions of C12, C13, C14, you can be fined or jailed for hate speech for saying that. Then it's just a reminder to Christians that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. If the book of Revelation looks kind of fairy tale like, there'll never be a time when the planet will just imprison people for saying they believe in Jesus or execute them for that. Remember, one step usually leads to a second and a third and a
Hmm.
thousandth. And if Western democracies today in 2024 are beginning to cough and they're beginning to show the symptoms of this type of illness, where do you think things may potentially head within the next 3 or 4 decades? And I'll just close out with this because I think the solution is not to worry, like David said, oh my God, it's all going down. A biblical perspective is trust in the Lord, and a biblical prescription for a Christian who's like, yeah, these do not seem like godly principles. If someone hates Jesus, they should be able to come up to my face and say, I hate Jesus Christ. I think he's disgusting. I think everything about him is violent and bigoted. And I should be invested in protecting their right to say that. It's
Hmm.
not just Christians who agree with me who I should be trying to protect. It's everybody's ability to freely express themselves. And two quick examples of that in the Bible are, of course, the gangster King David in 2 Samuel chapter 16. As King David was exiled from his kingdom, his son overtook it because of some huge moral failings by David, where he had a man murdered just for an adulterous relationship, basically. David was exiled from the kingdom. His own son was hunting him down. But look at David's attitude in this. 2 Samuel 16, 5 through 12. As David approached Baharum, a town on the outskirts of his kingdom, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there. His name was Shimei, son of Gera, and he cursed as he came out. He pelted David and all the king's officials with stones. Though all the troops in the special guard were on David's right and left, all of the most lethal soldiers in the kingdom, the special forces, CIA level, like the Green Berets were right next to David. This guy's cursing David and throwing rocks at him and the boys. As he cursed him, he said, get out, you murderer, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. The Lord has given the kingdom into the hands of your son Absalom. You have come to ruin because you are a murderer. Kind of true, but also kind of slanderous. You're going to an exiled king with his special military force around him, and you're cursing him to his face. You're insulting him. You're throwing rocks at him. Look at David's response. Abashi, son of Zariah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut off his head. And David says, what does this have to do with you, sons of Zariah? Even if he's cursing me because the Lord said to him, curse David, who can ask, why do you do this? David then said to Abishai and all his officials, my son, my own flesh and blood, is trying to kill me. How much more than this Benjamite? Leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look upon my misery and restore me to his covenant blessing instead of his curse today. So just extreme mercy. David did
Mm-hmm.
not go over and order his soldiers to cut off this guy's head. He had every full right to do it. He had all the power in the world. He was a reigning king in exile. This guy was just some random dude throwing rocks at him. And David said, let him live. It's his right to curse me. He had a humility about his own failure. He said, I've done a lot of things he's accused me of. And even if I were innocent, maybe the Lord will look upon this type of insult thrown my way and have mercy on me. So a merciful approach, a free speech approach, even to his enemy. And then finally, the second example we have is in 1 Samuel chapter 3, verse 11 to 18. And it's the priest who trained Samuel a lie. And he was basically told by the Lord in those verses, in verse 11, see, I'm about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle. At that time, I'll carry out against Eli everything I spoke against his family from beginning to end. For I told him I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about. His sons blasphemed God, and he failed to restrain them. Therefore, I swore to the house of Eli, the guilt of Eli's house will never be atoned for by sacrifice or offering. So Samuel was given this message from the Lord, and he was told to go to Eli and tell him, listen, your entire house is going to be wiped out because your kids are a bunch of twerps. They're evil, and you didn't do nothing to rein them in. And
Mm-hmm.
look at Eli's response to this. Samuel laid down in the morning. Eli called him over and said, Samuel, tell me everything that God told you. Samuel tells him, look, God said he's basically going to destroy everything you own. He's going to destroy your family. He's going to destroy everything because you didn't do the right thing. Eli's response is, do not hide it from me. He hears the words and he says, he is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes. So Eli doesn't smack Samuel. Eli doesn't punish Samuel for telling him any of
Mm-hmm.
this. Eli doesn't hold resentment against it. And I think Christians can take a note from these two men, David and Eli, and their response to people who disagree with them, to people who they had the authority to limit the free speech of. They allowed the people to speak. They did not abuse their authority and restrict them from voicing the message that was a personal insult. And they trusted that the Lord would do what was right ultimately, and that they did not have the political power to censor them. So that was a long ramble, but the point me and David are trying to address is, Christian, you're commanded by the Bible to allow people to voice their opinions. And if you're ever in a position like this at your job as a manager, obviously within professional standards, but our job is not to police the speech of other people like some of these governments are attempting to do. Our job is to trust in the Lord to move the political process so that all people, even those who disagree with the Bible, are free to speak their minds at any time they wish. Berean Brotherhood,
Peace
we love
out.
you guys. Like and subscribe. Hit that like, subscribe button. We're about to hit 130 subscribers. Who's going to be a lucky person to take us over the edge again? We don't know, but
We
it
don't
could be
know.
you. Join us. Keep us in prayer. We love you guys.
God bless.